Ladies and gentlemen, First Ministers, Member of the Cabinet, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you here to St Andrews High School in Coatbridge for this public discussion as part of your Cabinet meetings. I'm sure you will agree that it's an ideal venue for this evening's event. Opened in 2006, St Andrews High School is part of North Lanarkshire Council's Schools and Centres 21 programme, a programme which has seen £500 million invested in the school estate since 2000. I know you have spent some time today seeing some of the work we do in North Lanarkshire and some of the work our partners do. It is essential that we are able to continue that work for the people of Coatbridge and for North Lanarkshire as a whole. You have also seen some of the work we do with our partners across the community, and I'm grateful you've taken some of the time to see these projects. And while it's welcome that you've seen these things earlier, tonight is the most important part of your day, because tonight you have the opportunity to engage with North Lanarkshire's biggest asset, its people. I hope everyone here enjoys what is sure to be an engaging and illuminating public discussion. I'm sorry I have to leave. The good people of Shona want me back there, so I have to shoot back. My driver will be doing about 100 miles an hour, seeing as how you've made me late. So that leaves me to say thank you very much and to introduce Joe Fitzpatrick, Minister for Parliament. Joe.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Provost Robertson. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Cabinet is delighted to be here in Coatbridge for the 8th meeting that we've held out with Edinburgh this year. Since coming to office, this government has been committed to holding cabinets across the length and breadth of Scotland. Last year saw an amazing engagement in politics on an unprecedented scale in the recent history of our country, and we want to build on the renewed sense of energy and enthusiasm. We want to be the most open and accessible Scottish Government ever, a pledge the First Minister made when she came to office last year. So this is your opportunity to ask questions about the work of the Scottish Government, locally and nationally. So in terms of how things are going to work tonight, in a moment you'll hear from the First Minister. We'll then open the floor to take your questions for around about an hour, and following the formal question and answer session, we hope you'll be able to join us for a cup of tea, a coffee, and to continue the discussions through in the refectory. So, without any further ado, can I ask you to please welcome the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon.
You don't know what I'm going to say yet. You should probably wait and see. Thank you very much indeed for that warm welcome, and massive thank you for being here tonight. You know, it's absolutely great. Here we are in Coatbridge on a Monday night. It is Monday night, isn't it? And 250 people here to talk about politics and the local and the national issues that are important to you. So that is really incredible. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. Can I also say a big thank you to North Lanarkshire Council for all of their assistance today. And huge thank you to St Andrews High School for hosting us. Thank you to the students of the school who met us when we arrived and gave us such a warm welcome. And big thanks to the students who have sang so beautifully for us this evening as well. The Lord Advocate, who's sitting menacingly, you've got to behave yourself when the Lord Advocate is in the room, incidentally, I should warn you of that. But Frank Mulholland actually used to be a pupil at this school when it was Columba High School. So he is a product of Coatbridge and a product of this school. And he's not done too badly for himself, I think. But we're all delighted to be here tonight, but Frank's particularly happy to be here. And since it's his old school, he's agreed that he's going to answer all the difficult questions this evening. So anyway, this practice of getting the Cabinet out of Edinburgh, getting us round and about the country, is one of the ways in which we are meeting a pledge that I made when I became First Minister. And that pledge was that we were going to do everything we could. I was going to do everything I could to lead the most open and accessible government that Scotland has ever had. So it follows from that the main purpose of this evening's event is not for you to listen to us, although you'll have to listen to me for a few minutes longer. But the main purpose of tonight's event is for us to listen to you. And so most of the time we've got available tonight is set aside for your questions to us. And I want to stress at this point that you can ask absolutely anything you want to ask. You know, people come to these meetings and are sometimes quite surprised that we don't vet the questions in advance. We don't allow you to ask some things and rule other things out of order. You can ask about any subject you want, and for our part, we will do our best to answer your questions as openly, as honestly and as frankly as we possibly can. There might be some things that we can't give you an immediate answer on, if it's a particularly detailed question or a specific issue. If that's the case, we'll get back to you. And there might be, and we've found this before, there might be people here who've got questions that are a bit personal, that they don't feel too comfortable asking in front of everybody. If you've got a question like that, you'll find forms have been handed out. Feel free to write it down, hand it in, and we'll get back to you with an answer. And if you don't get your question taken tonight, that option is there as well. We'll all be here for a wee while after the session as well if there are things you would rather speak to one of us about privately. But the point I'm really trying to stress here is that this is your opportunity to say what's important to you. If you've got a question you want to know the answer to, if you've got just a point that you want to put across to us, if there is something that's bugging you or something that you disagree with us on, this is your opportunity to tell us. So please take that opportunity, and I hope very much that you enjoy the experience. Now, I've got no doubt you'll ask about a very wide range of subjects tonight, so I'm not going to try and cover all of the possible topics that you might want to ask about, but I do want to say just a few words at the beginning, really just setting out the general approach and the priorities that we as a government are pursuing. Just a couple of weeks ago, we published our programme for government for the next year, and while that sets out the legislation and the policies that we will pursue over the next year, or at least until the Scottish Parliament election in May next year, it also started to set out the vision we have for the country for the next 5 to 10 years. And it describes how we're going to go about building a fairer country, a more prosperous country, and a more democratically engaged country. And I want to illustrate these 3 themes, the themes that run through everything we do as a government: fairness, prosperity and engagement, by talking about some of the events that we've been undertaking here today. Because this ability to get out and about and meet individuals, meet local organisations, is one of the big benefits of us holding these cabinet meetings outside of Edinburgh. So between us today, all of the ministers here have undertaken 16 different visits and events in the local area. Shona, Robison, the Health Secretary, visited the Lanarkshire Beatson and the Glencairn Garden project at Coat Hill Hospital. Michael Matheson, the Justice Secretary, where is Michael? Over here, visited the local police and fire stations. John Swinney visited a very successful local business, SST, which designs and makes sensors. And one of the visits I made was with Alec Neil to Glenboig Community Centre, an absolutely fantastic place, catering for older people, for children, putting on a whole variety of different events and activities, a really, really impressive community centre. But the reason we were there today was to launch our Warmer Homes Scotland programme. This is investment we are making of about £200 million over the next 7 years to help people make their houses more energy efficient. We launched the latest Home Energy Scotland information campaign, which lets people know what kind of support is available for them for energy efficiency. And there's a really important context to that, because we're now living in a time after the recession when the economy is starting to recover. But notwithstanding that, we know that lots of individuals, lots of families, lots of households are still finding things really tough. So we know that we need to help, and we know that in many cases, for many people, things are going to get even tougher. The UK government's budget is going to make things probably an awful lot worse. Many of those who are going to be hardest hit will be working households and low incomes. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, when he delivered his budget just a few weeks ago, announced cuts to tax credits that alone are going to reduce the incomes of about 200,000 households in Scotland by an average of £3,000 a year. Now, these are working households. So that's the impact that we're going to see from some of the decisions that are being taken at UK government level. So our job is to try to do everything we can to help people. So we've had policies like the council tax freeze, which have been protecting household budgets. We've been shielding people from some of the worst impacts of welfare cuts, for example, and something we're very proud of as a government. We've made money available to local authorities so that nobody has to pay the bedroom tax, a really heinous and horrible measure that the UK government introduced. And as soon as we've got the power to do it, which hopefully we'll have in the next few years, we'll abolish the bedroom tax completely. So we are doing everything we can to help, but we can't counteract all of the UK's cuts. So we're trying to find other ways that we can reduce household bills or help people reduce their own household bills, which brings me back to the energy efficiency programme. In the last 7 years, we've already helped around 700,000 households put energy efficiency measures into their houses. That's 1 in 3 houses across the country. We are currently spending in Scotland something like 10 times more per head of population on energy efficiency for low-income households than the UK government does in England. But we still need to do more to tackle fuel poverty. You know, we're an energy-rich country, and yet lots of people live in horrendous conditions of fuel poverty. So the programme that Alec and I launched today focuses on those most at risk, pensioners, people with disabilities and working parents on low incomes. And the investment we announced today will help about 28,000 households across the country. And it's part of a bigger programme of energy efficiency measures, which also incidentally helps the economy because we need to have companies, often small companies, that install these energy efficiency measures. So it's helping people get their bills down, but it's also providing jobs and work for companies in Scotland as well. So that's one example of what we are doing to try to help people at a time when many still find things very tough. And that's part of our broader commitment to building a fairer society. One of the other things we've put at the heart of our programme, it was at the heart of my programme for government a couple of weeks ago, is a set of measures to raise attainment in our schools. And it's appropriate to be talking about that tonight here in a school. Our education system in Scotland is exceptionally good. School leaver destinations, you know, the people who leave school and go on into further education, work or training, they're at record levels. Last month, young people across Scotland gained a record number of passes at higher and advanced higher. And here at St Andrews, the proportion of young people gaining at least one higher actually increased very significantly. And that's a really good example of the outstanding work that teachers and young people in this school and at schools across our country are doing. But notwithstanding all of that really good work, we still know in Scotland there's too big a gap between the results that are being achieved by pupils from the most deprived areas of our country and the results of pupils in the least deprived areas of our country. And we've set ourselves the objective as a government of closing that attainment gap. We've published a new national improvement framework. We want to get better and more consistent evidence of how pupils are performing. We've established a £100 million attainment fund for primary schools so that we can make sure there's increased resources getting to the schools that need it most. In fact, that attainment fund is helping schools in this part of the country. 6 of the primary schools associated with this school benefit from the fund, so do several others in Coatbridge, and Angela Constance, the Education Secretary, visited one of them, St Augustine's Primary, earlier today. And what that fund is doing is giving schools in the most deprived parts of our country extra resources to focus on literacy, on numeracy and on the well-being of their pupils. And that's going to be really important over the next few years to help us drive down that attainment gap. So that's a key part of how we're tackling inequality. I'm a passionate believer, as we all are, that the best thing we can do to tackle inequality in the long term is make sure that every young person, regardless of their background, regardless of their family circumstances, gets absolutely the best start in life and the best education. Reducing inequality, in my view, whether that's in education or across society, is a good thing to do in and of itself. But the other point we've been making as a government and trying to make sure there is widespread understanding of is that if we tackle inequality, we actually also help our economy. There's a massive evidence from around the world these days that says if you've got an unequal society, if there's a big gap between those who do well and those who don't do well, then we actually harm economic growth. And I suppose that stands to reason when you think about it, because we know instinctively that when we're all better off, when everybody's got a fair chance to contribute their talent, their skills and their energy, then that collective effort is going to mean that our economy performs better. But if there are people who are not able to contribute, then our economy will be held back as a result. So that's why the government's economic strategy puts fairness and competitiveness together, two sides of the same coin, and why we set out in the programme for government that we want Scotland to be seen as the best place in the UK to do business, so that we can encourage businesses to come here, to create the jobs, to provide the opportunities that we need. And that's relevant to the second visit I made today, along with John Swinney, to BioCity at Newhouse. BioCity, many of you might be familiar with it. It's a hub that already is home to 22 life sciences organisations. The European Screening Centre is based there, which is a multinational project which helps to assess compounds to discover new drug treatments. We want BioCity to grow further, so we are planning to establish it as an enterprise area. And what that means is that companies that choose to locate there get additional incentives. So we do more to encourage companies to come and set up there. And what that means at that particular site, which is very relevant to this part of Lanarkshire, is that the number of jobs there could treble over the next period, from 100 people who are employed there just now to just short of 300 people. So massive opportunity. But it also means that some of the medical technologies of the future could be developed just a few miles from here. I mean, I've visited some of the companies today that are already based there. The newest tenant, Clyde Bioscience, it's developing technologies that will improve the safety of drugs, and it's been helped by Scottish Enterprise to recruit more people. There's another company, Biogelex, and it's developing gels that it can be used for cell culture in developing drugs, and also potentially for regenerative medicine, and it's got big plans for expansion. So what you've got there on your doorstep is a facility that is going to employ significant numbers of people, but also a facility that is doing world-class, cutting-edge research. So many of the drug and medical discoveries of the future could be developed here in Lanarkshire, and that is absolutely fantastic. And that's just one of the many things we're doing to try to encourage business. Setting up that enterprise area is all about encouraging economic activity here. We've got the small business bonus, which gives rates relief to small businesses. 3,000 businesses in North Lanarkshire benefit from that. It means they pay reduced business rates, or in some cases they'll pay no business rates at all. And that's important because small businesses are so vital to getting our economy growing. So these are just some of the things we're doing to tackle inequality and to get our economy growing. And I stress, those are two sides of the same coin. We won't have an economy that's as prosperous as it can be unless we've also got a society that is as equal as it can be, and vice versa. The last thing I wanted to talk about was engagement. I think we're going to be much more successful as a country than we will otherwise be if we encourage people, the length and breadth of this country, to get involved, to be interested in what happens in their communities, to care about the decisions that politicians like us make and get involved in trying to influence those decisions. And I guess tonight's meeting is directly relevant to that. On Friday of this week, it will be exactly 1 year since the independence referendum. It's hard to believe that it's a year, but 1 year on, and you know, when I think back to that campaign, one of the wonderful things about it, whatever side of the debate you were on, whether you were yes or no, one of the wonderful things about it was the way it got people interested and enthused and energised and empowered and educated about all of the big issues of the day. You know, people got to discuss the future of the country, the kind of country we wanted to be, in town hall meetings, at home, in the street, in the pub, in the hairdressers, in the shops, wherever you went in Scotland this time last year, people were talking about these issues. And the referendum is passed. It was last year. But I think it's really important we don't lose that sense of engagement. And what I want to do, what we want to do as a government, is make sure that we are harnessing that interest we saw in the referendum and trying to apply it to some of the big decisions we take on a day-to-day basis. So that is why we're here tonight, as a part of that process. We are all government ministers. We take many decisions each and every day of the week, and the buck stops with us. That's as it should be. We're elected to take those decisions. We're accountable to you. But, you know, democracy doesn't have to be something that just happens once every 4 or 5 years when you turn up to vote. It should be something that happens day in and day out in communities the length and breadth of the country. We are accountable to you. We are here to serve you, and it's important that we are open to your questions, but also that we hear your ideas and suggestions for how we make this country even better than it already is. So that's all I want to say to you by way of introduction. I very much look forward to your questions, answering the easy ones and giving the hard ones to Frank, or maybe some of the others. But thank you again very much, and please take the opportunity and enjoy it.
Thank you, First Minister. We'll now move on to the question and answer session, but maybe first of all I should introduce everyone on the stage. So first we have Education Secretary Angela Constance, then Alec Neil, Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Communities and Pensioners, then Roseanna Cunningham, Cabinet Secretary for Fair Work, Skills and Training, then the Justice Secretary Michael Matheson. Here we have Keith Brown, Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, Investment and Cities, then Health Secretary Shona Robison. Next to the First Minister is Deputy First Minister John Swinney. Then we have Fiona Hislop, Cabinet Secretary for Culture, Europe and External Affairs. And lastly, of course, we have the Lord Advocate, Coatbridge's own Frank Mulholland. Okay, so I'm going to take questions in batches of 3, and I've also got a number of questions which have been submitted by social media, so I'll try and weave them in through the night as well. This is a large audience, so I'm going to have to be quite strict in terms of chairing, so please can we try to keep questions as brief as possible, and if you do have a follow-up question, if you could keep that for the cup of tea after, and then grab the buttonhole of the relevant Cabinet Minister and put the points to them directly. That way we'll be able to get the maximum number of questions in. There are a lot of people here, and I'm sure a lot of people have some questions which are very important to them. So I'm going to try and take as many questions as possible, but as the First Minister said, if I don't manage to get to your question, there are forms on the sheets, so if you write your question on that, all the questions will get a written response. And there's also that opportunity to have a chat over a cup of tea or a cup of coffee after. So let's make a start. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you have a question, wait until the microphone reaches you, and then give your name before asking your question, and again try and keep your question as briefly as possible. So the gentleman right there with the glasses, yep, and the white paper, yep.
Yeah, hi there. The experts seem to see underground coal gasification as dangerous, if not more dangerous than fracking. Could we get some reassurance that this process will not proceed in Scotland, particularly the Firth of Forth, and be included in the moratorium, and a stop put to this very dangerous, potentially dangerous process in Scotland?
Okay, thank you. And the gentleman right at the front.
Okay, cheers for that. Currently, the Tory government are trying to push through an anti-trade union legislation, and this is basically a yes or no question. Keeping in mind we've got the Working Together review in Scotland, which is a very positive thing that's going on. Would this government refuse to implement the anti-Tory, the anti-trade union legislation that the Tories are pushing through?
Okay, and then the lady just, yep, at the end there, yeah. Just back, yeah. I'm going to try and just move around the hall. So.
My name's Grace McNeil and I run the View Park Conservation Group. We're in the process of trying to do a community buyout of a local estate. It's an entailed estate, but we've annoyed the trustees that much that they're working with us to give us it as a community park for the people. So can I now annoy the government and ask us, can we get £1 million off you to help do this?
Listen, if you get £1 million out the Finance Secretary, you'll be doing better than I manage most days of the week.
Well, the fact is that there is so much infrastructure getting built in this area. We want this park for a green lung for our children. Okay. It is an ancient woodland and it's not really any good to anything else except a community park for the people. It is in a very deprived area and it will be put into trust and it will be properly managed, but we do need help as financial and advice on how to do it properly. So I would like a...
Okay.
£1 million. Right, I'm going to ask John to deal with the first question on fracking and underground coal gasification. Dennis, I'll pass your question to Roseanna, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Fair Work, and our MPs in the House of Commons probably right now are there voting against the trade union bill tonight. And then Alec Neil, you maybe want to take the question, because Alec Neil is responsible for community regeneration. I'm pretty sure John hasn't brought the government chequebook with him tonight, but it's a nice try anyway. But Alec can give you some pointers. That was, in case you didn't hear it, that was she'll take an IOU. Alec can give you some pointers to the kind of funds that might be available to help. So John, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, first of all, on the question on underground coal gasification, we on all these questions are taking what we have described as a cautious, evidence-led process to any scrutiny of these issues. And on the issue of fracking, we've put in place a moratorium. And during the period of the moratorium, we are undertaking research across a whole range of different questions around environmental factors, around geological factors, around public health issues in relation to the implications of fracking, to make sure that we are equipped with the ability to take the most carefully constructed decisions on any applications that happen to come to us. But while we are gathering that evidence, there will be no consents offered under the fracking, any fracking propositions that are advanced. On underground coal gasification, we have taken exactly the same evidence-based process, that we will do the scrutiny and gather the evidence to enable us to advance all of our decisions about what we recognise to be a significant issue where there is a lot of public concern and a lot of public unease. So I can give you the assurance that the government will be treading very, very carefully in gathering all of that evidence, making sure we listen as extensively as we can to all of the different perspectives and the evidence that exists on this question to enable us to be in a position to arrive at a very considered decision. And the public concern, the public unease on all these points will be borne very strongly in mind by the government as we arrive at the conclusions that we arrive at, to guarantee that all questions are properly assessed and scrutinised before we come to setting any policy in this area of activity.
Okay, Roseanna? Dennis, we are going to do every single thing we can to stop this legislation going through. We'll do it before, during and after, if need be. Our MPs right now will be arguing on the floor of the House of Commons. They will be arguing alongside a number of other political parties, and from what I could see in some of the coverage recently, perhaps even some of the Tories, because I noticed a Tory MP who's come out and described this as looking a bit like Franco's Spain. So the Tories maybe have one or two problems there as well. So we will make as many alliances as we can in order to get this
off the statute book if it ever gets there, but hopefully that it doesn't get there. But there's an underlying tragedy about this, which people are not really thinking about. It's been brought in as if it was going to solve a problem of industrial relations, and it's going to do the exact opposite. We've had a really good relationship in Scotland, both this government and the government before, the Labour Lib Dem government before, great relationship with the STUC, good working around the table, and I think you talked about the Working Together Review, which is now, we now have the Fair Work Convention, which came out of that. We sit down and talk to the STUC on an absolutely regular basis, and we have a really, really good industrial relations record in Scotland, better than anywhere else in the UK. And we get that really good industrial relations record because we have that fantastic relationship. So if the UK government is really serious about getting a good industrial relationship going, they would be copying what we do instead of trying to drive a coach and horses through it. So we are going to fight this every single step of the way. There'll be no cooperation from the Scottish Government in implementing draconian trade union legislation. Yeah, we're not, okay, that's right.
We will not implement it if it does go through.
If you just allow us to do everything we can, first of all, I don't think we should accept here that it's going through. As Roseanna said, there's actually some Tories starting to rebel on this. So if you've got the SNP, hopefully now Labour, and some of the other smaller opposition parties, the Liberals, although they don't have many MPs anymore, are also against it. If we can get, and what we've demonstrated since the general election is the Tories can be beaten and they can be forced into retreat. So let's focus on beating it if we can, but you will not get any cooperation from us in terms of implementing legislation that we think is draconian. And Alec, who's Alec?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got £1 million, Alec, in your back pocket?
No problem, I'll just write the cheque right now. Grace, can I first of all just commend you and your husband Tom, who's sitting next to you, for all the tremendous work that I know you do, both of you, in terms of developing and protecting community assets in Lanarkshire. Can I also say that we've just passed as a Parliament the Community Empowerment Act, and one of the purposes of that is to empower communities to be able to buy assets that are good for the community and that the community can develop. So let me say, in principle, we want to do everything we possibly can to help you. But obviously we don't fund ourselves directly the purchases. You have to put together basically a financial package. There are a range of potential sources of funding both locally and nationally. Locally, there are funds. There's a fund called the REN Fund, which is landfill money, which in principle can be used for this kind of development. There's also the Environmental Fund, which comes from the wind farm money, which is in the control of the council. At national level, we have third sector money, if it's a third sector organisation, and one or two other potential funds as well. So what I suggest we do is, once this is finished, you, Tom, and I will have a cup of tea through there, and we can then talk about how we can help you put a package together so that hopefully you have a real chance of being able to buy this asset and develop it for the local community.
We've actually had Dr. Edwards.
Grace, can
Let's have the cup of tea after.
Can we follow up? Because if we get into this backwards and forwards in every question, we're not going to get very many questions in. So if after we've answered your question, if you don't feel we've answered it or there's other comeback you want, if you can keep that till afterwards, then we'll get through lots more questions as a result, if that's okay.
Okay, next questions. So there's a lady just at the corridor. Yeah, Catherine back. Back, no back, right back. Yeah, so from last time.
Back row, I think.
Yeah, right. No, keep going back to the right. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. My name's Helen Connor. I'm a local teacher, and I was very interested in what the First Minister said about the Scottish Attainment Challenge, and very much welcome what the government are doing on that. But I wondered if somebody could explain to me how continually testing children on standardised tests will actually raise attainment. and how you link that priority to what was a government pledge years ago in terms of reduction in class sizes. We were told a number of years ago that we would have 18 in primary 1. I don't think there is one primary 1 in North Lanarkshire that has 18. Take it from me, as a practising teacher of 30 years, continually testing children does not alter attainment. It gives you data, it gives you league tables. Reducing class sizes and giving you additional support for learning teachers will raise attainment in a deprived area like Coatbridge.
Okay, thank you.
Hi there, my name's Michael McGuigan. I'm interested in the current ding-dong that's reported to be happening between the Scottish and Westminster governments with regards to abortion legislation, and I'm keen to understand if there's progress made in that with a favourable outcome for the Scottish Government, but more importantly, what is the aspiration of the Scottish Government in seeking to have a say in that legislation?
Okay, thank you. And then young gentleman there with the yellow top. Yeah. Just
There was a lot going round yesterday about the SNP containing in their manifesto next year about a potential timescale for a second referendum. Is there any truth to this?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Angela to take on the wider question about education. I just want to say a quick word about assessment, first of all. The first point I would make is I absolutely agree with you. Assessing children in and of itself doesn't make any impact on attainment. What you have to do to improve attainment are the things you talk about. That's why I spoke at length about the attainment fund, getting extra resources into the classroom where it's needed most. What assessment does, as you rightly say, is give you the evidence of whether what you're doing is working or not, and allows you to say, well, we need to do more here, or that thing that we've tried isn't working. And I think we need more of that evidence at primary school. Now, as you, I'm talking to a teacher of how many years did you say? 30 years, so you'll know much more than me, but I think all bar 2 of our local authorities right now do assessments of primary school children, but they don't all use the same assessment. So all we're talking about doing is basically having a situation where all local authorities use the same form of assessment so that it is consistent information we're getting. It's not a return to testing that says the only measure of a pupil's performance is whether they pass or fail a test. It's about informing teacher judgment, and as you know, teacher judgment is central to curriculum for excellence. And I don't want to see league tables. So one of the things we'll talk very carefully to teachers and parents and local authorities about is how we use the data that comes from assessment so that we're not making it easy to produce crude league tables, because that's not the intention of it. But your fundamental point about assessment not in and of itself raising attainment, I 100% agree with. But I want us not to be as much in the position of flying blind in terms of the things we're doing to be able to assess whether they're working or not, so that we know where we need to make more investment or to try different things to raise attainment. So we'll look forward to continuing to talk to teachers. Angela met the EIS last week to talk about some of the detail around this. And on that point, I'm going to hand over to Angela, and then I'll ask Shona to take Michael's point on abortion, and then I'll come back to the point on the referendum. Angela.
Thanks for that, Helen. I visited primary school today in Coatbridge, as the First Minister said, St Augustine's, and one of the things that we were talking about was the National Improvement Framework. And as the First Minister has indicated, make no mistake about this, this is not a return to the past. We are most certainly not turning the clock back. We are not returning to the national testing of old, high stakes testing which rely on single pieces of information. And the National Improvement Framework was published last week. It is draft, and there's a huge opportunity here for teachers to be really sharing and shaping how that National Improvement Framework develops as we move forward, because it won't rely on one single piece of information or evidence. It's about getting the right basket of evidence available. And there's a huge opportunity here to be really building on the strengths of Curriculum for Excellence, bolstering teacher judgment, and having, you know, better information for diagnostic purposes, so it informs what we actually do first and foremost in the classroom. And ultimately, this is about children, and it's an important part of the jigsaw as we proceed to close the attainment gap. And when I visited the primary school today, they were telling me about some of the standardised assessments that they already use. And they are telling me that the gap in 5-year-olds amongst children from the least and most deprived backgrounds can be quite stark. So we know the attainment gap starts early, and that's why we need to do more early. We've obviously got a massive expansion of early years in childcare, but also we need, you know, a concerted focus on what we're doing in primary schools. There's a range of information available for pupils in their senior phase, but we now need to build on the strengths and the experiences of teachers in the front line. And I've written today to every head teacher in Scotland, asking for their input and asking for them to be discussing this with their staff in the classrooms. And there will be a number of engagement events specifically designed for folk like myself, government ministers, civil servants, academics to engage with teaching staff, because we are determined to get this absolutely right for the sake of our children. And in terms of your point about class sizes are important, and that's why where we have been successful is to eradicate class sizes of 25 or more for children starting school. So children starting school going into primary one, there are only a handful of classes across Scotland where those children are going into class sizes of 25 or more. And the advantage of the Scottish Attainment Challenge, and North Lanarkshire is benefiting to the tune of in excess of £2 million, is that they are using that additional targeted resource often for additional teaching staff. And that's over and above the commitment that the Scottish Government has made to maintaining teacher numbers, and there's an additional £51 million for across Scotland to retain teacher numbers. So I hope that Helen goes some way to reassuring you, and it is the views of people like yourself, Helen, who have been in the profession such a long time, that we need you to help us to craft this to ensure that we're moving forward for the future and most certainly not going back to the past.
Okay, Shona, on Michael's point on abortion.
Hey, Michael, obviously discussions with the UK Government are still ongoing and have not been concluded on whether the law on abortion will be devolved. However, our view is simple, that nearly all health policy and the delivery of health services is devolved, and therefore the legislative framework for those services should also be devolved. It makes sense for continuity. However, the Scottish Government has also made clear that we would have no plans to change the law on abortion, but we will continue to focus on improving services and on prevention. And if you look at the quite significant reduction in teenage pregnancies over the last few years, we're having some success with that regard, and we want to continue that downward trend on teenage pregnancies. So we'll focus very much our attention on that going forward.
Okay, and lastly on the referendum, we've always said we would, as people I guess would expect us to, in our manifesto for the Scottish Parliament election, set out our views on another independence referendum, whether there are any circumstances that would render another referendum appropriate at some point in the future, whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. I've already said that I think one circumstance in which another referendum might be appropriate is if in the referendum that's coming UK-wide on the European Union, we ended up with the UK coming out of the European Union, but Scotland had voted to stay in. I think that's one circumstance in which people might say, hold on a second, we don't want to come out of the European Union, so we might want to consider again being independent. So our manifesto will set out whether we think there are other circumstances. The important point I would make, though, is there's a careful balance to be struck here. On the one hand, we respect totally the result from last year. I didn't like the result from last year, but I absolutely respect that was the decision people took. So
unless there's an indication that a number of people have changed their minds, then I don't think it would be appropriate to argue for another referendum to happen soon. But on the other hand, nor do I think it would necessarily be right for one politician or one party to rule out another referendum indefinitely, regardless of circumstances or of public opinion. Which I guess takes me to the most fundamental point. This will be driven by what the majority of people in Scotland want, because all we can do as the SNP, on any issue, to be honest, but I'll focus on this issue, all we can do is put a proposal in our manifesto, or put our thoughts in our manifesto. It's then up to you to decide whether you vote for that manifesto. And if there is at some stage in the future another independence referendum, it's up to you to decide whether you vote for independence or not. I've wanted independence for Scotland all of my adult life, as has everybody sitting here, but that's not in and of itself going to make Scotland independent. Scotland will only become independent when a majority of people vote for it. That's democracy, and that's absolutely as it should be.
Okay, thank you. What I'm going to do this time is take one question from the floor and 2 Twitter questions. Catherine, the lady in red that you were going to go to last time, down here. Yeah. Okay, I'll read out the Twitter questions while the microphone's getting down. So the first one is from Lisa Jackson McKenna, who's asking about zero-hour contracts. What is the Scottish Government doing to end zero-hour contracts? And the second one is from Billy Scott, asking how do you think the downturn in the Chinese economy will affect Scotland? And
hey, my name's Alison McLeish, and I strongly believe in the community empowerment. And given that you're in favour of the Community Empowerment Act and stated that the days of doing things to communities are in the past, can you tell me if you're planning to change the current statistic of more than 50% of all planning proposals that are rejected by local authorities being overturned by the Scottish Government in appeals?
Okay, right. Lisa, question from Twitter and 0 hours contracts. Roseanna will answer that. Billy's question on the Chinese economy, I'll give to John. And then Alison, your question on community empowerment and planning. Alec Neil will take that one. So, Roseanna.
0 hours contracts, I guess most people understand they're contracts of employment that don't guarantee you any actual employment. From one day to the next, from 1 week to the next, from 1 month to the next, you've no idea whether you will get hours to work or not get hours to work. And it will change and vary, and it makes it almost impossible for people to actually plan and live properly. So they are profoundly unfair, and we are trying our very best to persuade employers the length and breadth of Scotland to stop using them. There's been recent figures have come out about the number of 0 hours contracts. The most recent figure we know for Scotland appears to be about 51,000 people on these 0 hours contracts, compared to about 1.5 million across the whole of the UK. So we're doing slightly better in terms of numbers. We have managed to get our figures down a little bit lower than the rest of the UK. But the difficulty that we have is that we don't have the powers over employment law to do what we might want to do directly about them. So that is part and parcel of the work that we do with the STUC, the Fair Work Convention that we set up. This is one of the issues that they are looking at, and a number of other things that we are doing in government to get employers to sign up to good practices instead of bad practices. We're getting good job numbers in Scotland, but what we're focusing on now is that it's not just about numbers of jobs, it's about quality of jobs, and it's about the sustainability of jobs. And 0 hours contracts are absolutely opposed to any of those things. And we want to try and squeeze them right out of our labour market if we can. So what we try to do, through all the work that this particular portfolio is involved in, is to get employers to walk away from them and to start treating their employees much more fairly, because it goes back to what the First Minister said, that improved productivity and equality in the workplace do go hand in hand. One isn't subsidiary to the other. You need both to work together if you're going to make improvements in both.
Okay, thanks, Roseanna. And John on
the question from Billy about the impact of the Chinese economic slowdown, I think that this is an illustration of the fact that there can be economic changes very far away from us that can have an effect right here, and the degree to which economic growth in China has slowed down percolates through the whole world economic system, and as a consequence it's beginning to have an effect on the levels of business confidence that there are within this country. I was just earlier on today, we had our regular weekly Cabinet meeting, and I give an update to Cabinet on relevant issues around economic recovery, and one of the issues I was raising was a declining level of business confidence, much of which can be attributed to concerns about the international situation arising out of the performance of the Chinese economy. So we won't be insulated from these developments. What we then have to do is to make sure that we try to avoid the implications being felt here, which is why the type of visit the First Minister and I made earlier on today to BioCity is so crucial, because BioCity is one of a number of organisations that represents higher value employment that can create much greater economic impact here in Scotland, and then give us the ability to then export the products that we're generating here to a much wider range of countries around the world. And some of the products we saw today were absolutely world leading, and the developments will bring real value to the Scottish economy. So we'll never be insulated from the effects of the Chinese economic slowdown or comparable factors, but what we can try to do is to make sure that we develop the skills and the infrastructure and the innovation that enables us to lead a more productive and a higher value Scottish economy as a consequence, and that will give us the best protection from the impact of a slowdown of that type.
Okay, and Alec.
Okay, can I first of all say that I think there's a lot of concerns about the planning system. It was reformed by the Scottish Parliament about 10 years ago, and we think the time is right to have another look at it, and as we already announced in the programme for government, we are having a fundamental look at the planning system in Scotland to see how well it is serving communities, how well it's serving the national community, the local community, as well as the economy and the environment. So I accept that there are many criticisms we could all make of the planning system, but we have to operate according to the law as it currently stands. Now, when a local authority turns down a planning application and the applicant then appeals to the Scottish Government, the decision then, depending on the nature of the planning application, is taken by an independent reporter or by a minister, in me as the planning minister, based on advice from reporters and also looking at all the other evidence. Now, one of the things a reporter, for example, will look at is the local development plan. And the local development plan cannot be adopted unless it's been democratically decided by the local authority once every 5 years to adopt a local development plan. And the local development plan zones land for commercial development, for housing development, and all the rest of it. So, for example, if a local authority has turned down a planning application, and that's been done in contradiction of the local development plan agreed by the community, then the reporter may well recommend that the appeal be upheld because it's in a contradiction to the local development plan. And the local development plan obviously involves the community much more widely than any individual planning application. Another consideration, I'll finish on this, is that when a decision comes to ministers, you have to take a decision on the balance about promoting the economy and at the same time safeguarding the environment. Now, one of the things we need to do is we need to look at a number of planning applications where they're of national significance. It may well be that locally people are not too happy about it, but it's the right thing to do for Scotland. So it's getting a balance all the time between local and national interests and also between the environment and the economy. By and large, I think we usually do that. We don't always succeed, but that's why we're having a review to see how we can improve the system in all its aspects.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, more questions? Yeah, gentleman just here. Yeah. Right at the front, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, thanks very much for coming out. My name is Martin O'Neill, I'm from View Park. I'm a very proud member of Police Scotland, staff member. I work in the service centre in Motherwell, one of the very few remaining. I've been there for 10 years, Strathclyde Police before that. We have been through, I don't want to say the word, but it's been terrible. Morale is at an all-time low, and we feel as if we are getting pushed about, and only the police officers seem to be getting taken into consideration. We are considered frontline staff because we take the 999 calls, the 101 calls, and although the HMICS is looking into how things can be made better for working for the public, I don't feel as if it's getting done quick enough. The recent recommendation from Her Majesty's Inspectorate was keep things the way they are now until we get more staff in. However, my concern is the staff that are coming in, at least in Motherwell, are 18, 19-year-old. Now, I've got nothing against that, but they've got absolutely zero life experience, and some of the calls that we get are extremely harrowing. So a lot of time is spent, I'm sorry I'm taking up time, but a lot of time is spent on familiarising the younger staff with the types of calls that we get through, and I make that no joke about the type of calls you get. So my question really is, what can the ministers do to speed up the process and make the place a more enjoyable place to work again that works for the community?
Thank you. Okay, was there a question down here? Yeah, you can go right at the front, very front.
Front row.
Hi, I'm Leonie McConnell, and I just want to know, if Scotland had opted for independence, do you think the approach to the Syrian refugee crisis would be different, and how?
Okay, is there one at the back someplace? Yeah, I see a gentleman, Catherine, just in, no, in, Catherine, right, just where you were, yeah.
Michael Clarkson. I'm an accountant and I work a lot with small to medium-sized enterprises. Now, the First Minister said that there was a drive to help small businesses because small businesses were going to help drive the Scottish economy forward. But there seems to be an imbalance in the grant funding structure. Currently, it is business to business, it is heavily leaning towards manufacturing, but a lot of the new businesses are retail, hospitality and restaurant sector, and the grants are excluded from them predominantly. My question is, what funds would the Scottish Government be prepared to make available for this small sector of the economy to help businesses get established?
Okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, I'm going to ask Michael Matheson, the Justice Secretary, to answer Martin's question. Before I do so, can I just say on behalf of the whole government, a heartfelt thank you to you and your colleagues. You do an invaluable and absolutely essential job for the police. I'll ask Fiona to answer the point about Syrian refugees. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. Leonie. And John will take on Michael's question. So, Michael, can you start with Martin's?
Martin, thanks for your question, because earlier on today I spent some time with some of the local officers just doing the work that they do locally, and like the First Minister, our police service in Scotland provides a first-class service day in, day out. It's a world-leading service, and there's a considerable amount of international interest in the way in which we go about delivering policing in Scotland, so we shouldn't underestimate the professionalism and the quality of policing which we have in Scotland overall. The reform of policing, though, was the biggest change in the public sector, probably almost in a generation, taking 8 forces into one. And the position we had previously with 8 forces wasn't sustainable. For example, if we were previously with Strathclyde was a force that covered half of the country's population, and then we had 7 other constabularies that were covering the rest of the half of the country's population as well. But you mix that alongside the fact that many of the actual smaller constabularies didn't have the same capacity to deal with major issues in the way in which Strathclyde was because of its scale as well. So moving to a national service allows us to make sure not only do we sustain local policing, but we also have that national support that can go in and assist local policing in a very specific way. And when I was speaking to the local commander today, he was saying the difference that that's made to them has been very significant in being able to tackle particular issues as well. But if we also didn't reform policing, given the austerity agenda that's been pushed forward by the UK government, we would have been in a position where we would have had to actually, the most likely scenario would have been is to cut away our policing numbers overall. An example of where that has happened has been in England and Wales. In England and Wales, we've already lost 17,000 police officers, almost as many as we actually have for the whole of Scotland. And the predictions are over the next couple of years, they could possibly lose between another 20 to 22,000 police officers because they have 43 constabularies down there. So reform is really important in order for us to be able to protect frontline policing. But you also pointed out that there have been some challenges as that change has been taken forward as well. And we fully recognise that a reform of that scale has an impact on the staff who work within the organisation. And in the changes to the call centres that are being taken forward as part of the 3C programme that you'll be familiar with, of which Mother was part of that programme, is that the HMICS has come out and said that we should continue to move towards that model of how call handling for 999 and 101 calls should actually be handled. But to do that, in the present arrangements, Police Scotland would have some challenges in being able to take that forward more quickly in the way in which we would like to see it happening. So in order to speed up that process, just for exactly the very reasons that you've highlighted, we're providing Police Scotland with an extra £1.4 million of new money right now in order to accelerate that process of being able to recruit staff, to have them trained and to make sure they're in place before any further change takes place. And one of the real challenges they have had has been able to recruit the right type of staff. And one of the things that they're doing is looking at how they can change the recruitment process to try and encourage more people to come into that particular sector to support this change as well. And they're looking at innovative ways in which they can use social media, etc., in order to encourage people to apply for these jobs. So it's important that we support Police Scotland in helping to speed up that process, because that will assist individuals like yourself doing your job day in, day out, to have the right support and assistance working alongside you to be able to do what at times can be a very difficult and trying job. And the extra money which we're providing them with in this financial year is to assist them in facilitating that so they can do it much more quickly than would otherwise be possible given the recommendations that Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary have made.
I hope that gives you some reassurance, because, you know, we've gone through a reform process, you've gone through a reform process that we think is the right thing to do, and we think it's been a necessary thing to do, but we don't underestimate how difficult that's been, and I think probably particularly difficult for people doing the kind of job that you're doing. So we're very aware of that, and we absolutely recognise that, which is why, you know, we're doing all the things that Michael's spoken about to make sure we're supporting the police to make that transition at an appropriate pace. Yeah, I think it's right, and what you're saying is you need to see that happen more quickly to take the pressure off you, but we need to make sure that the resilience in the system is such that it's happening at the right pace. So again, you know, take it back to your colleagues that we understand and we know the pressure, and we're hugely grateful to you for what you do.
Can I just come in just with one point
Frank, yeah.
about Police Scotland? Police Scotland's driven up standards in the most serious cases, investigation of them. Police Scotland, since it came into being, has solved every murder in Scotland. And it's allowed the skills and experiences developing for that to be devoted to historical cases, such as Elaine Doyle murder in Greenock, such as the disappearance of Moira Anderson in this town, such as Choka murder, such as Francis Auld. I could go on and on. Now that's a driving up standards of investigation. What you used to get was Strathclyde Police expert in the investigation of homicides. Not the case for, say, Northern Constabulary or Grampian, but now what you're seeing is specialisms and expertise being devoted to these types of crimes. So what I think is that, you know, with all the problems that Police Scotland have had, bedding in, you'll see standards continue to be driven up, and you'll see a reduction, which we are seeing in homicide. and a huge big bonus. Since 2007, knife crime has been reduced by 62% in Scotland. Now that's not the government, that's not the police, that is all of us, politicians, public, civic leaders, opinion formers, police officers, reducing knife crime. And you know what that means? That means that there's a correlation to homicide, because that's been reduced. The type of gratuitous violence that you used to see in a grieving family, that their 19-year-old son's been stabbed to death in a street in the west of Scotland, we're seeing less of that now. So again, what we're doing is focusing on key issues, and you'll see going forward that the standards will continue to be driven up.
Thanks for raising what is obviously a hugely important issue just now. Okay, Fiona, do you want to take on Leonie's point about the Syrian refugee crisis?
The situation of the Syrian refugees is a human tragedy, and it deserves a humanitarian response. And in terms of your question, you asked, would an independent Scotland have dealt with things differently? And I think the answer is yes. And why can I answer that answer? Is if you remember, sometimes in history, when a picture changes, a photograph can change people's response or make them realise how bad things are. And that photograph of that young boy, Aileen Cowdy, I think if people hadn't paid attention before, they certainly did. And why can I say that we would have responded differently in Scotland? Because when our First Minister spoke in the Parliament, she reflected the views, not just, I think, of our government, but also the people of Scotland. But she wasn't the only one. Cross-party, the response in Scotland was saying, we are a country that wants to respond in a moral and responsible way. Now, what has to be done is enormous. It's a complex issue. But the UK government has completely abdicated responsibility. We have a moral responsibility to make sure that the Mediterranean is not just a watery grave for Italy, it's a watery grave for Europe. And in our consciousness, can we actually live with our conscience if we don't try and help? Now, there are different areas that we can do support, and there's different areas we can work on. The First Minister held a summit just over a week ago. We've got a task force headed by our Minister for Europe and International Development, Alec Neil, is part of that, because our response has to be about housing and about integration. But when other countries step up to the mark, and this country, as far as the UK is concerned, stands by, that is not acceptable. Now, we're finally, with your response, and all the public's response, not just here, but elsewhere, the UK government has finally agreed to accept 20,000 Syrians. But they're not going to take anybody that you see on the televisions that are the poor people you see, particularly in Hungary or elsewhere. They're going to come direct from the camps in Lebanon and Syria. So yes, much more has to be done. We are engaged with it, but it is a moral responsibility. But the reason we've gotten a response so far from the UK government is because of your response, the people of Scotland and our First Minister leading the way with calling that summit and getting a bit of action where it's been badly let down by the rest of the United Kingdom government.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. And lastly, John, on Michael's point about SMEs.
What we do, Michael, is we put in place a range of different types of financial support that essentially relate to different groupings and organisations within the economy. So we will have regional selective assistance, which is available for companies that are particularly creating significant employment as a consequence of investing in particular locations of the country, and areas around about Coatbridge will be eligible for regional selective assistance. We'll then have things like enterprise areas, which the First Minister and I were in BioCity to acknowledge the decision that she announced a couple of weeks ago, which was that BioCity was to be established as a new enterprise area. And then we'll have measures such as the Small Business Bonus Scheme, which is designed to make sure that most of the smaller businesses on the high streets of our country are actually able to access either a reduction in their business rates or the elimination of their business rates altogether. Now, in most of the kind of smaller premises around about towns like Airdrie and Coatbridge, you will have many, many organisations that will be benefiting from that assistance. And we took that decision because we wanted to try to make a profound impact in supporting the ability of people to do business in some of these locations where we accept it is more difficult for town centres to thrive because of the upsurge in both online shopping and out-of-town shopping into the bargain. So what I'm trying to set out to you, Michael, is the fact that we've got a kind of, a tapestry of different types of financial support that are available in different parts of the country. For this locality, principally the type of support will be the small business bonus, which is designed to ensure that as many companies as possible are able to benefit from that assistance, and that can contribute to improving their productivity and their profitability as a consequence of a reduction in one of their important business costs that they have to face.
Okay, gentlemen here, yeah, just with the beard, fourth from the front.
Thank you. Everyone knows it's 100 years since the Great War. I'm 74, and being 74, I knew 5 survivors from the First World War. All were wounded from this area. My grandfather from Edinburgh, he came home blind from the Somme. So the point is, there's a group of SNP members trying to get a monument built in Arras, France, in memory of these people. The question is really for Keith Brown. I've met him twice, and he mentioned that he might be thinking of a monument in Conti-Maison in France. I was just wondering if we could confirm what is happening on that subject.
Okay, and was there somebody at the front here? Yep.
Thank you.
We'll take 2 from the front and 1 further back. I'm going to try and squeeze a couple extra in. So here and
Hi, I'm Kira. The referendum was the first time 16 and 17-year-olds got to vote. Do you believe this is successful, and why?
Okay, and then just right at the end.
My name's Paul, and it was Swinney spoke of a more equal Scotland. Would that include a more equal minimum wage? Because I could go to work and make £3.79, whereas someone else doing the exact same job could, if they're over 21, make £6 odd an hour, and they could work less hours and make more at the end of the month.
Okay, question, and then stick the next one in there, lady with the volunteer, just back, Catherine, no back. Yep.
Hi, I'm working the NHS locally. I work in the local hospital. I'd like to ask the Health Minister, our local hospital runs waiting list surgeries every single weekend. I don't understand who made the decision that that was cost effective. You put in place treatment time guarantees that we struggle to meet. In order to meet them, we have to put waiting lists on. Waiting lists that are paid for everybody in the theatre on a Saturday and Sunday are paid at 3 times their hourly rate. Surely that money would be better taken back, extend the treatment time guarantees, allow us to provide better patient care, make better conditions to attract more nurses onto our wards and more doctors into our hospitals, instead of spending what appears to be silly amounts of money just to meet sometimes really unmeetable treatment time guarantees.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll ask Keith to respond to the point about the World War I monument. Ciara, I'll ask John to deal with the question on 16 and 17-year-olds. My short answer it was yes, it was a huge and fantastic success. Roseanna will take the point about age differentials in the minimum wage, and Shona for the health service question. So we'll kick off with you, Keith.
I think, to be perfectly honest and blunt, I think we've come up against a bit of a brick wall in relation to the proposal. There's probably no other way to describe it. The idea, as we discussed before, was that I believe because there was an ongoing attempt by some veterans organisations to try and purchase land in Conti-Maison, not far from Arras, there may be an opportunity because of land that may have been available next to it to investigate the possibility of the model for the whole of Scotland, for all the different regiments of Scotland. And you've made the point, and many others have. Well, Canada has it, Newfoundland has its own memorial, many other countries do, and Scotland doesn't. There are real practical difficulties for the Scottish Government in getting involved in buying land in France. In fact, we wouldn't do it that way if we could do it at all. However, we also took some advice through Fiona Hislop's appointee in relation to the commemorative events which were taking place during the period of the Great War. Norman Drummond and others. And what emerged, even in our meeting, in fact, there was no consensus in our meeting about where this could be, if you remember. Some people advocated one place, some advocated another. So we have come back to the situation where we don't have that consensus. It would be a fairly big step for the Scottish Government to try and arrange this. And to do it, I think we need to have some consensus from veterans organisations. We need to have the right site, and it's not an easy situation to resolve. Now, I went back to Constance again this year to have a look at the site, the possibilities for the site. I think I said to you at the time, one of the main advantages was because we had a very sympathetic and helpful mayor in place at that time. She was, unfortunately, she'd developed cancer, so she wasn't there this year. I wasn't able to take that forward. I'm more than happy to have a further discussion to see how we can do this. I must admit, having looked at this from a number of different angles, there is not an easy solution to this. And there is not one, it's quite clear to me, that's going to satisfy even a majority of veterans organisations, a majority of veterans. I understand the case that you've made, I think we had a lot of agreement, but it's not an easy question to resolve. But I'm more than happy, especially since we're coming up to 2016, 100 years since the Battle of the Somme on the 1st of July, I'm more than keen to have another discussion to see how we can take this forward.
Okay. Maybe can you follow up with Keith
Sure.
afterwards, because I'm keen we'll get through all of these questions, if that's okay. All right, thank you. John, do you want to take Kira's question?
Yeah, I think I agree with the First Minister. Yes, it was a total success.
That's a relief.
Exactly. It's one of the rare occasions I agree with the First Minister. But one of the interesting points about this is that when we thought this was the right thing to do. We think young people at the age of 16 have got very significant responsibilities in our society, could do very significant things in our legal framework, so we thought it was right that young people should vote in the referendum. Not everybody took that view, but after the referendum, Parliament unanimously came to the view that this had been a good thing. So even those who were against it could see afterwards it was the right thing to do, because the young people of Scotland engaged fantastically well in all of the issues. And, you know, there were different opinions. Some voted yes, some voted no. But one of the things that I thought was utterly refreshing during the referendum was watching young people at school debating and discussing the whys and the wherefores of independence and making an informed choice. Now, when it came to the question of should we continue this practice, when Parliament came to legislate to give 16 and 17-year-olds the vote for the elections in next May for the Scottish Parliament, and then the following May for the local authority elections, Parliament voted for that unanimously. So there was absolutely no dissent, which is testament to the fact that the young people of Scotland handled the opportunity to vote in the referendum with great credibility and with great effectiveness. So we thought it was an unparalleled success, but that was because of the way in which the young people of Scotland seized that opportunity and used it to the full.
Yeah, our young people were a massive credit to the country last year. It was probably the best thing about the referendum campaign. Roseanna, going on to another youth-related issue on the minimum wage.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. What was your name? Paul. You're basically raising a point of fundamental fairness here. I think it's absolutely the case that people who are doing exactly the same job, side by side, should be getting the same wage. This government actually thinks that wage should be the living wage, not just the minimum wage, and that's what we're trying to persuade employers to do. But it is utterly iniquitous that people can be in the same workplace earning completely different wages for doing exactly the same work. And I'm afraid it's going to get worse, because the UK government has now introduced, they're calling it the national living wage, but it's not actually a living wage at all. It's a kind of enhanced minimum wage, which is only going to be payable to those who are over 25. So they're introducing yet another differential in there, which I think is also profoundly unfair and which may lead to some very serious consequences for workers as they get older. So fundamentally, it's an issue of fairness. If you're doing the job, you should get paid the rate. We believe the rate should be the living wage rate, not just the minimum wage, but as an absolute basic minimum, it should be the minimum wage. And that's what we're trying to persuade all employers in Scotland to start thinking about. So I'm very glad you raised it. And I think it's really important that young people think about this. There are good employers out there. So when you're looking for work, try to find one of those really good employers that's going to play fair with you, regardless of your age.
Here, yeah. And Shona, on the NHS and waiting times.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the work that you do in the local hospital. I visited Monklands. I presume you're referring to today to the new Beatson there, which is fantastic. It's going to open in a few weeks to the public, and it'll be a really, really good new service. And I think it shows the importance of an investment into Monklands Hospital. You know, when I was first elected to the Parliament, and we were looking at the issue of waiting times, at that point actually they didn't produce information on how long people had waited, and it wasn't unusual for people to have waited 18 months for an outpatient appointment or 18 months for an inpatient appointment. Now those days are thankfully over, and we have some of the lowest waiting times ever, and the treatment time guarantee was introduced to bring a consistency across Scotland, because that was the other problem in the old days, that people would wait for differing times depending on where they lived in Scotland. So the treatment time guarantee has helped to standardise a very high level of performance and quick treatment for people in the NHS. Now, you mentioned weekend working, and of course we've got the 7-day services task force looking at what the appropriate use of the weekend working is, and we're looking at how can we do more diagnostics, for example, and make sure we have the resilience in our services over 7 days, and there'll be more work coming out on that as well. And finally, I would encourage you to take part in the national conversation we're having about the future of health and social care, looking at the next 5, 10, 15 years, because, you know, as I've said before, it's about getting the right targets, and we're discussing what those right targets are with yourselves, the professionals, and of course the public. But it's also about how do we keep people out of hospital, and a lot of discussion about how can we make sure our primary care services work better to keep people out of hospital and safe in the community, because we know that still far too many people are ending up in hospital when they don't need to be there. But look forward to you hopefully contributing your views to the national conversation as we take these issues forward.
Okay, time is almost upon us, so one last quick round of questions. Right at the back, yeah, right at the very back. There was...
Hi there, I'm a secondary school teacher. Now we welcome the attainment advisors jobs, but within schools, I work in North Lanarkshire, our budget has been cut by 43%. Some teachers are teaching 3 and 4 courses within each class, and over and above that, they have got rid of the principal teachers. Can you explain why that would actually be improving the attainment gap?
Okay, and I don't think I've got a question at the back at this side. Yep, the lady just here, yep. Yep. The microphone's just coming.
Hi, my name's Trisha Ferguson. In your opinion, is it better to reclaim brownfield sites for development or to build on farmland or greenbelt? And what circumstances, if any, do you feel would justify building on greenbelt land? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And two last quick questions.
Hi, my name's Aidan, and I've had a back problem for about 4 months now, and I went to the doctors firstly 14 weeks ago, and I was recommended to get an MRI scan of doctors and chiropractors, and in order to do this I had to go see a physio first. It's just to see what the deal was with that. How can you not go straight for an MRI rather than having to see physios first, and all the drama behind it basically?
Okay, and if you just pass the microphone,
Hi there, my name's Amy. I just want to raise a wee point on the new curriculum for excellence. Our year was actually the first year to go through this course. To be quite honest with you, it was very poorly done. We felt, we knew teachers were one step ahead of us in terms of coursework, what was getting to us when we were in 4th year. Basically, if you were to introduce a new curriculum for schools across the country, would it be done better? Because we felt there was nowhere near enough time to organise it all, and we feel almost like we're getting the brunt of it.
Okay.
Right, Angela, can you take the first question from the secondary school teacher at the back and also answer the last question there on curriculum for excellence? Shona, if you can take the question about access to a physio, and given that he wants to be a PE teacher, this is quite important that we get his back fixed. And Tricia, I suspect there's a specific issue lying behind your question. And I just have to tell you, and I know this can be frustrating, that we can't comment on the specific issue because it may well be the subject of further legal action. But I'll ask Alec Neil to comment on the general issue about Greenbelt Brownfield, but we won't be able to comment on the particular issue. And I know that will be disappointing to people, but I've got the Lord Advocate sitting there and he'll arrest me if I break the rules, okay? So, Angela, do you want to kick off on the education questions?
Yes, thank you for that question. And also, thank you for welcoming the initiative and our commitment to funding an attainment advisor to work with every local authority. And that decision was taken in part by a recognition that some of that expertise that used to exist within local authorities centrally over the past few years has been depleted. And it is very important that there is someone with a background in education, in frontline education, that is able to work with teachers and work with schools and where they need to improve, and to do that in partnership, of course. So thank you for welcoming that. That was a very important part of last year's programme for government, and it's one in which we are following through. In terms of the overall budgetary issue, I can advise that according to information provided by all 32 local authorities, that actually this year spending in education right across Scotland will actually increase. Now obviously, I can't account for any local variation either from local authority to local authority or within schools within local authorities. The Scottish Government doesn't micromanage local government spend or indeed how they set their budgets. Of course, local authorities do have very clear legal obligations in a number of regards in and around the Education Scotland Act in terms of the provision of education, and there are some very particular responsibilities they have in terms of additional support for legislation. So while we don't micromanage councils and their budgets, I can stress that local government has been treated fairly by this government in terms of their share of the overall cake that is available. And as I intimated earlier, we have identified additional resources, £51 million, that can only be spent on maintaining teacher numbers. It is for local authorities and schools to determine whether they use a principal teacher model. I know some schools and local authorities, instead of having principal teachers, have used faculty heads, if you like. And I know from my engagement with the teaching trade unions that there is some discourse and discussion in and around that, and in terms of the pros and the cons of those two models. In terms of the young woman's question about Curriculum for Excellence, can I say Curriculum for Excellence is not new. We have spent the best part of a decade implementing Curriculum for Excellence. What has been, what schools and local authorities have been tasked with over the past few years, of course, is the movement to the new exam system. And of course, last year we had the new National Fives. This year we had the new hires. And next year, the transformation to the new exam system will be complete with the new advanced hires. So we are almost there in this very important period of transition. And what I can say is that Education Scotland and the SQA have provided any support that they've been required to provide on time. And they have done that, and that is, their role in all of this is carefully scrutinised by ministers. But I think in terms of some of the challenges over this year and last, it is my job always to scrutinise further the role of organisations like Education Scotland and the SQA to see what more we can do to ensure that teachers, but most importantly that our young people, have the very best of support to ensure that they perform to their very best also. And it is worth also recognising that young people, the length and breadth of Scotland, have secured record exam passes this year. And that is a credit to our education and indeed our teachers, but first and foremost it is a credit to our very talented young people that we are blessed to have the length and breadth of this country. Okay. Shona.
Aidan, I'm sorry about your drama as you described it. I think probably what's going on, without getting too much into the detail of your case, is that your doctor's probably trying to see whether treatment with a physio might may mitigate the need for any MRI scan further down the road. But you know, without knowing too much about your case and not getting into too much detail, I'm not sure, but we can look into that. I'll get somebody to get your details at the end. I mean, what we try to do in the NHS is to get you to the right professional, and the role of physios and other allied health professionals is really, really important to use their skills to try and resolve issues, sometimes without the need for a scan like an MRI scan or any other. So what we'll do is we'll get someone to get your details and we'll have a wee look into what the plan there is, okay?
Okay, and Alec, on the general issue.
Yeah. Okay, Tricia, it's a very good question, but just to make sure I don't stray into anything in Lanarkshire, I'm going to give you the example of Edinburgh. Edinburgh, our capital city, it's forecast that its population is going to grow over the next 20 years or so by 25%. We'll have to house those people in Edinburgh. There's already a massive backlog of people on the waiting list for a house in Edinburgh that can't get one because there aren't enough houses in Edinburgh. So we're going to have a very substantial building programme of owner-occupied, social housing, private rented housing in Edinburgh to come anywhere near meeting that demand. Now, what myself as the Planning Minister and Edinburgh City Council, because I've discussed this with them in detail, ideally in an ideal world, we would like to just build on brownfield sites, but there are two problems. The first one is, even if we were able to build on every brownfield site, we still would not have enough land to come anywhere near housing the increased population of Edinburgh, and we will have to look at using some green belt land in order to do that, and most folk in Edinburgh now accept that. The second problem is, a lot of the brownfield land is either in the wrong place for a particular project or a particular housing plan, or it's very contaminated and therefore is not suitable for many types of development, or it's too costly to develop. So I would love to be able to say we can keep all the green belt we've got forever and just build in brownfield sites, but the reality is very different. And the final point is this: it's not a problem confined to Edinburgh. The Scottish population is forecast by the Registrar General to grow from its current record of just over 5.3 million to nearer 6 million people over the next 20 to 30 years. That means on top of the 150,000 people who are waiting for a new house in Scotland already, we're going to house another 700,000 or so people. There is no way we can do that without encroaching in some green belt, but it has to be done in a balanced way and in a sensible way. But unfortunately, the reality of it is that it has to be done to make sure we can provide the housing and all the other things that our people need.
Okay, expertly done without straying on to an individual issue. Is that?
That's us.
Okay, well, can I, before Joe rounds off, can I just thank you all, I think particularly the young people here, for an excellent selection of questions. As I say, if there are issues you want to follow up, please feel free to do so with us, but we certainly enjoyed the evening and I think I've learned a lot, so thank you very much indeed.
Okay, as the First Minister said, there is the opportunity to continue the discussions over a cup of tea through in the refectory, but if you could let the Cabinet members have a couple of minutes to get off the stage and we'll see you through in the refectory. But thank you all very, very much.